Last time, we asked what philosophy is, and we found it's not just a subject in a book, but the courage to live inside a question. If you've watched episode 1, you already know that philosophy begins the moment the ground under your beliefs gives way. But once the ground shakes, a new question rises from the dust. If my beliefs can fall, what about the world itself? That's where we begin today, with the first branch of philosophy, the oldest and most daring one. Metaphysics, the study of reality. Before we trust what our eyes show us, before we accept what the world claims to be. So, if you have your coffee, your curiosity, and just a little willingness to doubt what you think is real, let's go deeper. Reality greets you the moment you open your eyes. The walls of your room, the air you breathe, the sounds outside, all of it feels obvious, solid, unquestionable. Most days, you move through it without thinking, as if life is a stage set you didn't design but agreed to act upon. But then, something strange happens. You wake from a dream that felt more real than waking life. You experience déjà vu, that unsettling sense you've been here before. Or you lose something so important that the world feels different. Suddenly, the background you took for granted begins to shake. Fārābī, the second teacher after Aristotle, would say that such moments open the door to the first philosophy. The study of being in the most general and universal sense, the root from which all knowledge flows. That's where metaphysics begins, in the cracks of certainty, when you dare to ask, what if the world is not what I think it is? Metaphysics is philosophy's oldest branch, the one that dares to ask the most ancient question, what is real? The name itself comes from Aristotle's editors, who placed his treatises on first principles after his works on physics. Meta, which means after or beyond, and physica, which means physics. Over time, the name stuck. Aristotle called it the study of being as being, existence itself, stripped of its specific forms where physics studies how the world works. In general, metaphysics asks what the world is at its foundation. Ibn Sīnā described it as the science of the most universal truths, existence, causality, and the necessary connection between them. He drew a sharp line between essence and existence, teaching that only God, the necessary being, has essence and existence as one. To ask what is real is to begin a journey toward the source of all reality itself. Metaphysics was not born from idle thinking. It was born from a survival-level need to make sense of a world that sometimes deceived us. The sun seems to travel, yet it is we who spin. A stick appears bent in water, but it is straight. A shadow looks alive, but it has no substance. If our senses could trick us in small things, how could we trust them in great ones? Ghazālī confronted this directly. Through radical doubt, he questioned even his own perceptions until he concluded that only divine revelation offered a foundation that could not be shaken. What he means is that our senses and even pure reasoning can wobble, so certainty has to come from a source that cannot deceive. That's exactly the impulse behind metaphysics. When appearances trick us, we go hunting for what must be true beneath them. We look across civilizations for the first map makers of the unseen. Different names for the same reach beyond appearances. Metaphysics has been pursued in every culture. In Greece, Plato described an eternal world of forms, unchanging realities behind the shifting appearances. In India, the Upanishads taught that all reality is Brahman, infinite, indivisible, the truth behind all illusion. In China, Taoist sages spoke of the Tao, the invisible pattern through all things. In the Islamic Golden Age, Ibn Sina merged Aristotle's logic with Quranic revelation, arguing that every contingent being points back to a necessary being. For him, metaphysics was not abstract speculation. It was a map back to God. Different names, but one impulse to find what does not change. They mapped the unseen so life could find its bearings. Metaphysics began as orientation, not escape, a compass aimed at what is ultimately real. We assume reality is fixed until something breaks it. A betrayal makes you doubt the very meaning of loyalty. A death bends your sense of time. A discovery rearranges your entire past. Reality holds only while our expectations keep working. It breaks when the next moment refuses to obey. David Hume warned that reality is largely habit, a structure our minds impose on repeated experiences. When habit shatters, we stand at a fork, cling to the broken pattern or look through the crack. This is what breaks for us, not the world itself, but our picture of it. And through the tear, a truer depth shows, where metaphysics begins again as seeing. Plato spoke of prisoners in a cave mistaking shadows for the whole truth. Buddhism warns of Maya, the veil of illusion. Kant argued that we can never know things in themselves, only appearances. We know the cave because we live inside one made of screens and curated feeds. Shadows today are metrics and headlines, lit by someone else's fire. The veil is woven from attention memory and language. Attention reveals one thing by hiding 99. Memory edits the past to protect the story of the present. Language slices the seamless into names, and we mistake the slice for the thing. The cave names our captivity to appearances. The veil names the limit and filter of our seeing. Suhrawardī, founder of Illuminationism, imagined reality as a hierarchy of light. The physical world is the dimmest light, and ultimate truth is the light of lights, God Himself. He taught that light knows by presence, not by description. Metaphysics for him was the ascent from shadow to pure light, a turning of the soul more than a reshuffling of ideas. If there is a veil, there can be unveiling. Not escape from the world, but a clearer seeing within it. Metaphysics is training the eye to bear more light. Our senses are not windows, but filters. They send raw data to the brain, which edits, interprets, and even invents details to fill gaps. The brain predicts the next moment, then checks what arrives. When the guess fits, we feel reality to be stable. And when it fails, we feel surprise and the model gets revised. Nietzsche said there are no facts, only interpretations. Interpretation is not a flaw, it is the way seeing works. But not all interpretations survive collision with the world. Ibn Rushd Averroes would respond that while perception is limited reason, aligns our models with the order of things. Reason tests predictions, looks for causes, and shares proofs, so private illusions can be corrected. So, the world we feel is an edited draft updated by error and inquiry. Metaphysics asks what must be true if any edit can move closer to the real. Today, metaphysics wears new names. We ask again, what is ultimately real? Are we seeing the thing or our model of it? Quantum theory says particles exist in probabilities, not fixed positions. Observation changes what can be said to be real. Beneath the randomness, the mathematics still holds like a law. Simulation theory suggests our universe might be a coded illusion. If code stands beneath appearance, the real would be the source, not the screen. Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis is a modern echo of Plato's cave. Plato called it shadow and fire. We call it pixels and processors. In the Muslim tradition, such ideas resonate with Fārābī's teaching that the material world is only a shadow of the higher, immaterial order created by God. What changes are the metaphors, not the question. Some say physics gives models, not revelation. Yet models that keep predicting hint at an order they mirror? Different clothes, same question. What stands behind the show? Metaphysics still remains the search for the ground. You practice metaphysics whenever you ask, do I have a soul? What happens after death? Is time real or an illusion? You do this whenever you keep a promise or say, I am still me. You assume a self that endures through time. You do this whenever you pray or hope. You assume a ground of being beyond what you see. Spinoza answered with a single infinite substance. Ibn Sina answered with a necessary being. Thomas Aquinas answered with being itself subsisting and the chain of act and potency. Different systems but same human need. To know what a person is, what time is, what the real is. Every one of these is metaphysics, and you have already done it without knowing the name. Your answer to what is real shapes how you live. If you believe reality is fixed, you will cling to the familiar. If you believe it is fluid, you will adapt and create. What you treat as real sets your risks and your restraints. It decides what counts as success and what counts as betrayal. It determines whose pain you notice and whose you edit out. William James said belief creates the fact. Because belief steers attention. Attention steers action. Action reshapes outcomes. Outcomes harden into the world you then call real. Ghazālī would add belief in the real aligns the soul with God. Truth becomes a light you live by, not a label you hold. The stakes of knowing rise because the knower is present. Reality has bones and skin. Hold to what is stable like bones. Move with what is living like skin. This is why the question matters. Because it writes your calendar, your vows, and your courage. Choose the anchor you will live by. Metaphysics rarely offers neat answers. It is not about ending the question, but living with it. We know with tools that have edges. Concepts carve the world, but also leave pieces outside the cut. Wittgenstein said the limits of our language are the limits of our world. Language is a net that catches some truths and lets others slip through. Where words fail, clarity can still begin in another way. Suhrawardī would say, expand your inner light, and your world will expand with it. Light knows by presence, not by description. As the light in you increases, more of what is becomes present to you. The limit is an honest edge, not a dead end. We walk it with humility and courage. Metaphysics becomes a practice of bearing partial light without lying about the dark. To ask what is real is to ask, who am I in it? Who I am depends on the frame of the real I live inside. Change the frame, and the self I can be changes with it. Sartre believed reality has no meaning until we give it one. If meaning is made, then I am a maker. Freedom and responsibility define my name. Ibn Arabī would counter that meaning is not invented. It is unveiled as we awaken to the one reality we have always been within. If meaning is unveiled, then I am a witness. My task is purification, attention, and surrender to the real. Either way, the question of the real writes the script of the self. Metaphysics becomes identity work lived out in time. Some refuse to ask this question because they fear the answer will undo their lives. We fear 3 losses: loss of belonging, loss of control, and loss of the story that kept us whole. So we blur the question with busyness and noise. But not looking does not stop reality, it only stops our seeing. Heidegger warned that ignoring the question of being is the surest way to live inauthentically. To refuse the question is to live by borrowed scripts. We trade being for roles, routines, and distraction. The courage to look is not self-destruction. It is consent to be changed by what is real. Metaphysics here is an ethic of attention. Stay with the question until it stops running. When you pierce the illusions, you become harder to control. You see that much of life is built on stories, and you choose which to keep. Clarity dissolves the levers others use to move you. You become less predictable to fear, to flattery, to noise. You can name what matters and let the rest pass by. Lao Tzu spoke of knowing enough. Enough turns the appetite down so freedom can breathe. Both point to the same truth. Freedom begins in seeing clearly. When you know what is enough and what is necessary, you are free to act without being dragged. Reality is not only out there, it is also in here, shaped by the mind and guided by the soul. We live between resistance and interpretation. The world presses back, and the mind lays a frame. From Aristotle on being as being to Ibn Sina on the necessary being. From Plato and the forms to Suhrawardī and the light of lights. Metaphysics is the human way of looking behind the curtain. These are maps, not cages. Different paths to name the ground of things. The verdict is double. There is what is necessary, and there is what we make of it. Hold to the ground and shape the meaning. It is not about finding one final answer. It is about finding truths worth living in. So tell us, is time part of the real, or only a measure of change? What do you think?